just in case. Thank you so much for coming. I appreciate you being here on this beautiful day. Today we are going to talk about community. So far we've been talking about, last week and the week before, we've been talking about individual awakening. We've been talking about, John Stringer was here last week for those who saw him. He was great. He was talking about aligning and awakening. Yes, Gay is doing her imitation of aligning, yes. Aligning and awakening and breathing and allow, yes. And that is an individual practice just to find the truth of who you are in your own heart and in your own experience. So today I'd like to widen our view a bit and talk about how we live together in community, our awareness in community. None of us lives in isolation, and certainly none of us thrives in isolation. So let's look today for a few minutes at the truth of who we are together. So my title is Living Sangha. For those familiar with the term, or for those unfamiliar with the term, Sangha is a Buddhist term and it means community. In the study of Buddhism, there are traditionally three jewels of Buddhism: the Buddha, the Dharma, or the teachings, and the Sangha. And in many communities, when you become a Buddhist, you vow to take refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. And each of them are equally important. There are some who say the Sangha is the most important because the Buddha and the Dharma can be found there. Buddhists have an image of the Sangha as a supportive, a loving community. Thich Nhat Hanh writes that the essence of a Sangha is awareness, understanding, acceptance, harmony, and love. Originally viewed as a monastic community, if you get on Google and you Google Sangha, you're going to see a lot of pictures of Buddhist monastic communities. And that initially was the image of the Sangha. Now, as we progress, the image really takes on the life of any supportive and loving community of whatever size. The notion of the Sangha comprehends that we thrive and we connect and we just grow, we awaken individually better in community. Thich Nhat Hanh has gone so far to say that the next incarnation of the Buddha will not be an individual at all, but will be the Sangha. Think about that. The next incarnation of ultimate awareness and enlightenment and knowledge will not be an individual, it will be all of us together as we enter this new age. You'll remember we talked about Thich Nhat Hanh earlier when he talked about the concept of radical interdependence or interbeing. Do you remember that? He talks about how we are so radically connected that the word he uses is we inter-are. We are connected to such a degree that we just inter-are. The example he uses is a piece of paper. Okay, this is supposed to be a blank piece of paper, so it is on this side. So take a look at this blank piece of paper. This is his example of interbeing. When you look at this piece of paper and you widen your awareness to everything this piece of paper is, what do you see? What do you see in this piece of paper, other than just the piece of paper?
Possibilities.
You see possibilities, yes, you certainly see that. You see also what went into this piece of paper. You see the sun that nourished the tree that became this piece of paper. You see the earth that nourished that tree, right? You see the rain that came down and nourished all of it that created this piece of paper. You see the farmer who nourished that tree, who tended that tree. You see his parents, his ancestors or her ancestors back to the beginning of time, without whom that person would not be there. Do you see what I mean? You see the sun, you see everything. The worker that turned this piece of paper from a tree into wood, into paper, the whole process. You see everything in this. This piece of paper would not be here absent any of it, right? Think about how you got here this morning. We're all sitting here, we've all had breakfast, we're all dressed, we all drove here. Think about the process of our getting here this morning. Did we do it alone? The concept that we got here by ourselves is laughable. We didn't make our clothes, we didn't make our cars, we didn't raise us up from babies, we didn't educate. There are so many people on whose shoulders we stand. There are so many whose effort and whose love and attention got us here today. You know, we can look in the mirror and we can say, I am great, I can do anything, I am alone, I am independent, I am powerful. It's a joke. We are so inter-are in just our very essence, in everything we do, in all our relationships. The Stoic philosopher Seneca wrote, "Our relations with each other are like a stone arch, which would collapse if the stones did not mutually support each other, and which is upheld in this very way." Isn't that a great image? You know the Roman arch? You all know an arch. What happens when you remove a stone? It all falls. Our relations with each other are like that. We know the importance of connection to our well-being, including our very survival. We've all heard of failure to thrive. We've all read stories of babies who don't get picked up, or people who don't get loved and who suffer and who indeed die as a result. Our interdependence is a fact of our biology. Dr. John Cacioppo, who's director of the University of Chicago Center for Cognitive and Social Neuroscience, has written that the absence of social connection triggers the same primal alarm bells as hunger, as thirst, and even as physical pain. As I was researching this, I found so many articles on loneliness and on the growing malaise in this country and around the world of feeling alone. In the 70s and 80s, at most 20% of Americans reported they frequently or regularly felt alone and lonely. And by 2010, in a national study done by Eyre, the percentages were closer to 40 and 45%. Cigna, the health insurer, released a study last month, May of 2018, which reported that most Americans report feeling lonely or alone at some point. And you know the most vulnerable cohort? Young people report loneliness in vastly greater numbers than older people. Chronic loneliness can lead to depression, increased stress, reduced sleep, high blood pressure. One study of 3 million people found that chronic loneliness increases your chances of early death by 26%. It is a fact. It is a malaise that is only solved by connection, by meaningful relationship. Our search for community remains as strong as it is because we know that we're connected. It's not that we just want to be connected, we certainly do, but we know that we already are. It's who we are. We are trying to complete that connection that makes us whole. It's kind of like electricity, you know? You become alive when you are plugged in. Don't you know that? You just wake up, you just get that burst of energy when you are plugged in. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. wrote about these connections that bind us. He wrote, "All men are caught in are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. I can never be what I ought to be until you are what you ought to be. And you can never be what you ought to be until I am what I ought to be." He spoke of the beloved community. Do you remember that? We've talked about that here before. He spoke of his image of the beloved community. Community in its totality, representing the love of spirit. Community reflects the divine, found and experienced in relationship. Don't we find that that's where spirit is found? That's what Martin Buber teaches us, isn't it? God is found by whatever name, in the relationship, in the connection, in the space between you and me. Our relationship brings it to life. Our connection gives it that spark that makes it flower into being. That's where we find the divine. This web of mutuality supports us, it teaches us, it awakens us. It's through this web, it's through these connections that we build these qualities, these virtues that make us better people, individually and collectively, that make the world a richer and a kinder and a more compassionate place. In community, we live the connection that is our absolute reality, even our physical reality. Okay, now I'm sure there are those in this room who know the theory of quantum entanglement way better than I do. Just shout it out. Just kidding. But no, it's true. Even on a physical reality, you know, people get up here and just give out the word quantum. I've now told you everything I know about science. But Einstein called our illusion of separateness a kind of optical delusion of consciousness. You know, we look at ourselves and we say, I'm a physical being, I'm a separate being. It's not true. On the atomic level, and I'll say it on the quantum level, our energies flow together. We are physically connected. It is a fact of our physical life. Linkages of atoms and energies do not even depend on time and space. What are they telling us now? What happens over here can have an instantaneous effect over there. They call it the butterfly effect. Even beyond that, even on an atomic level, an atom doing something over here will be felt over here without even the intervention of time and space. Where is this going to bring us? Who knows? I think it's going to speed up our cell phones. But other than that, who knows? But that is the truth of our physical reality. We are operating in spheres beyond our physical bodies. The notion that we are physically separate, that we walk this earth with no connection each to the other, is going the way of the dodo, literally. Now, this growing sense of connection is not without friction. Do you notice when there are changes in our global consciousness, as I think is happening now? I think our global consciousness is moving toward an understanding of greater connectedness, toward an understanding of greater communality, toward the notion that we are in this together. So what happens when that comes up? We have friction, right? We have pushback. Nothing is easy at the border. When we are moving from one state to another, from one consciousness to another, there are forces that resist it. Because there is fear, and there is judgment, and there is uncertainty. So what do we get? We get increased nationalism, we get increased tribalism, we get increased ethnocentrism. They all raise their head as this energy grows towards something that is coming, but is not here yet. It's not a smooth ride. Look at these energies for what they are. Fear, a very human response. Uncertainty, judgment, hostility, because we don't want things to change. We know how things are. When they change, we don't know how they're going to look, right? We're going to like it when we get there, but we're not there yet. What we're dealing with is the change, and that is scary. And I think that is the forces that we see. In a world, our community values are challenged. Our values of compassion and kindness and awareness and acceptance are challenged. And you can see that now every time you open the paper, every time you turn on the internet. We are having a national conversation right now of what community looks like, of what our community looks like, who belongs, how we want to look, who doesn't belong, what we do with folks who show up who want to join. It's happening all over the world. It's not just in the United States. And sometimes when I say conversation, it's more of a shouting match. The silence, bless you, the silence only means that the other side is taking the opportunity to reload, because we've also lost the ability to listen. Me being quiet while you talk is just me waiting for you to be quiet so I can start telling you what I think, right? That's not a conversation. That's a mutual shouting match. And sometimes that's what it feels like. There is so much hostility and fear that it is palpable. Almost you can't turn on the news. Sometimes I just turn on the news and I just do not know what to do. I just do not know where to go, what to think, what I do. I don't know what is mine to do. So how do we negotiate these times together? I mean, what do we do? This is a good time to have this discussion. How do we move forward in this national conversation, knowing that we are a national community? Sometimes communities are volitional, like this. Nobody makes you come here, right? You come here because you want to come here, because you find something here, because this is a community you choose to be a part of. Not all our communities are like that. I mean, we're a member of a national. I'm an American. I'm a Georgian. I'm so many things that exist only because I am where I am. I'm alive when I'm alive, and so that is who I am. Those are not the same volitional communities as these are, but they're just as important. I have the same obligations to them. I am still a part of them. I am still connected to them, whether by choice or not. It's just a fact. So the question is, given that we are connected, that we are in community, how are we going to behave? Are we going to lift each other up, or are we going to drag each other down? Because that's our choice. The Stoic Epictetus has a great theory. He says you can pick up a situation by one of two handles. You have to pick which handle you pick it up by. One handle enables you to carry it. That's the handle of compassion, integrity, kindness. The other handle you can't even pick it up. That's the handle of fear and distrust and hostility, and you can't carry it like that. So in a situation like that, we get to pick, it's a great image, what handle are we going to use to pick up this situation? You know, we get to pick each and every time. In 1967, the year before he was killed, Dr. King gave a speech to the 11th Annual Southern Christian Leadership Conference meeting. His speech was entitled, "Where Do We Go From Here?" Has anybody heard that speech? That's what it was entitled, "Where Do We Go From Here?" Talk about timeless. This was in 1967. In it, he chronicled the successes and the struggles of the civil rights movement in past years, and he identified the many challenges ahead. He asked how the African American community would move forward, what principles and what values they would carry to the continuing struggle. There had been many victories, there were many yet to be had. At that time, there was growing pressure in the African American communities to abandon the theory of nonviolence. Leaders such as Stokely Carmichael, Malcolm X had risen up and they had said, no, this is too soft. It's not going to get us where we want to go. We have to meet power with power. We have to meet force with force. That is the only way we are going to advance our cause. We'd had the 1965 Watts riots, and things were just simmering. And the country was at a choice point. Dr. King knew that these tactics would fail. Not only would tactics of violence fail to achieve the ends that they were intended to achieve, they would also fail because they would fail to lift up the community. He took the long view. He took what we call the balcony view. The goal is to preserve the nature and build up beloved community. Tactics such as that would leave us all smaller, would leave us all less. He wrote, or in his speech he said, "I'm concerned about a better world. I'm concerned about justice. I'm concerned about brotherhood. I'm concerned about truth. And when one is concerned about that, he can never advocate violence. For through violence you may murder a murderer, but you can never murder murder. Through violence you may murder a liar, but you can't establish truth. Through violence you may murder a hater, but you can't murder hate through violence. Darkness cannot put out darkness, only light can do that." He saw we need to bring a different energy. He went on to say, and I say to you, I have decided to stick to love. Imagine that. In the midst of all that, he says, I have decided to stick to love. For I know that love is ultimately the only answer to mankind's problems. And I'm going to talk about it everywhere I go. I know it isn't popular to talk about it in some circles today. I'm not talking about emotional bosh when I'm talking about love. I'm talking about a strong, demanding love. And he went on to say, I have seen too much hate. I have seen too much hate on the faces of sheriffs in the South. I've seen hate on the faces of too many Klansmen and too many white citizens counselors in the South to want to hate myself. Because every time I see it, I know that it does something to their faces and their personalities, and I say to myself that hate is too great a burden to bear. Think about that. Hate is too great a burden to bear. He says, I have decided to love. Dr. King knew that one cannot defeat evil with evil, hate with hate. To paraphrase Albert Einstein, what did he say? You cannot bring to fix a situation the same energy that created it, right? I thought about that as I was walking my little dogs 2 days ago. I thought, what can I say that makes sense? And I thought, you can't fix a situation by the same energy that created it. Remember what Mother Teresa said when they asked her if she would march against war? She said, no, I will not march against war, but I will march for peace. We have to change our paradigm. We have to change our thinking to be for the values we stand up for, to be for the values that we believe. We have to change the energy. Aren't we at the same place today? Aren't we at the same choice point? Aren't we asking collectively, where do we go from here? We have social forces in flux. We have oppositional camps developing. We have people screaming at each other. We have nobody listening. We are a community in need of a solution. We are a community in need of a path out. Dr. King called on us, and we are called today to remember that we are national community. We are beloved community. And only when we bring that energy to it can we build it. Can we call into community our better selves, our higher selves, our more loving selves that do not hunker behind walls of fear and distrust. What else was Dr. King saying? He was saying my community is not going to be people who look like me exclusively, or people who believe like me, or people who speak like me, or pray like me, or do anything like me. The challenge of building beloved community is opening the circle to include all in our community, and we know that that is all. We know that that is everyone. There is nobody. What does Dr. King said? You cannot travel far enough to be distant from the arms of God. Right? That is us. They comprehend, they encircle, they enfold everybody. We can always find someone to hate, to exclude, to marginalize, until we waken to the fact that every face is our face, right? Every face we see looking back at us is the face of spirit. How would we behave in actuality if we believed that the other person was the face of God? If we believe the other person was connected to us, as connected as our brother or our sister, how would we behave to that person, to that immigrant, to that inmate, to that member of another political party, to that person we didn't agree on one darn thing with? How would we behave? Rabbi Terry Bookman tells a story. A man in a boat with a bunch of other people began to dig a hole under his seat. When his fellow passengers asked him what he was doing, he said, "What do you care? Am I not digging under my own seat?" Well, yeah, but that's kind of where we are. We're each digging under our own seat, and the whole thing's going down. So what do we do? Where do we go from here? Where do we go from here? We do the same. We bring the power of love and compassion to our national discussion, to our individual discussions, to the way we approach these troublesome questions. That is how we must move forward in our national discussion on these issues, on immigration. When we turn on the news, when we see pictures of children being separated, when we see pictures of families being torn apart, we can differ on political solutions, but our humanity cannot differ. Our values of compassion and kindness and caring are not negotiable. The burden of behaving otherwise is simply too great to bear. So when I look for practices of what we should do now, when I think what I should say to this group, when I look for true north of how we move forward, I go back to basics. What I know is, being the stoic that I am, I don't control outcomes, but I can control the way I behave, right? I can control my process. Every enduring faith tradition has a statement of what compassion looks like. Every single one. In the Christian tradition, it's called the Golden Rule. It's in Matthew 7. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. In the Jewish tradition, Rabbi Hillel taught, that which is hateful to you, do not do to another. That is the whole of the Torah. Now go and study it. That's the whole thing. Do not do to others that is hateful when they do it to you. Is this very simplistic? Yes, it is. And you know what? That's okay, because most good rules are. Most good rules do not take a whiteboard and 20 minutes to explain. They are simple. It's the same message that Pope Francis had when he spoke to both houses of Congress in 2015. Here I am standing up here saying, oh, they're not going to want to listen to that. And then I found the guy's standing up in front of both houses of Congress and he's saying the same thing. It's the best message we have. Remember when Leanne Rubenstein spoke here a couple weeks ago? And she's from Compassionate Atlanta, and she spoke about compassion. She said, okay, I advocate compassion. I have two angels on my shoulder. One says compassion, and the other one says, oh, compassion, really, please. And then this angel says to this angel, do you have any better ideas? And the answer is we really don't. That is the one that lifts us up. When Pope Francis was speaking to the Houses of Congress, he said he was talking about the refugee crisis, about the global refugee crisis. And then he started talking about the United States. He said, on this continent too, thousands of persons are led to travel north in search of a better life for themselves and for their loved ones, in search of greater opportunities. Is this not what we want for our own children? We must not be taken aback by their numbers, but rather view them as persons, seeing their faces and listening to their stories, trying to respond as best we can to their situation. To respond in a way which is always humane, just, and fraternal. We need to avoid a common temptation nowadays to discard what proves troublesome. Let us remember the golden rule: do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Right? I'm not sure those guys were listening, but it can be always said again. And then he went on to say, this rule points us in a clear direction. Let us treat others with the same passion and compassion with which we want to be treated. Let us seek for others the same possibilities which we seek for ourselves. Let us help others to grow as we would like to be helped ourselves. Let us do for others what we would like to be done for us. Now, as I was thinking about the golden rule, what struck me about it? It's not a rule that you love your neighbor. I don't know about you, but sometimes when people say to me, you have to love that person you never met. You have to love this person that you really can't stand. That is some heavy sledding. The golden rule is not a rule to love. It is a rule of behavior. How cool is that? Because I cannot control whether I love you. I can control how I act toward you. Right? It's that simple. I can control how I act. And as C.S. Lewis pointed out, do not waste time bothering whether you love your neighbor. Act as if you did. How hard is that? Because when you act as if you do, over time you will come to love him. When you act as if you don't, over time you will come to dislike and distrust him. Because so often our feelings follow our conduct. It's a rule of behavior. When we don't know how to act, when you're like me and you're thinking, what is the next thing I can do? What do I do in the face of all this horror, in the face of all this pain? It tells me how to act. It tells me that I need to treat those people, all people, as I would like them to treat me. It means that I want to tell those who act in my name to treat them as I would like to be treated myself. When we do that, when we stick to that simplest of all rules, we truly cannot go wrong. And brick by brick, heart by heart, we build our beloved community. So let's take that into meditation.